Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Alex, or good afternoon for you. My name is Alex Niedermeyer, and I'm in Washington, D.C., where it's still the morning. Welcome to the last day of the symposium. Just a few housekeeping things here. So note that all participants are automatically muted when you come into the session. So if you would like to interact with the panelists and other attendees, which we encourage, you have two options. Please make use of the Q&A button and send your questions to the panelists. And that's great because then we can answer them in real time with the text messages or answer them at the end, and then we have a good recording of all the questions. If you can also please identify the panelists for whom your question is, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And then the second option is to use the chat feature. So please do introduce yourself using the chat feature and feel free to share any comments or observations or anything else. I think that is everything. With that, I'll hand it over to Mwenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex, for the warm introduction and regards from Zambia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever we are. Welcome to the last day of the exciting Land Symposium organized by the Land and Resource Governance Program, ILRG, and funded by USAID. We urge you, if you're not alone in the room, you should always wear a mask and please maintain reasonable social distance. Today, we have decided to only have 3 presenters. That is Ronald, Sonda, and Mlenga in that order. This is because we want to put at least 15 minutes at the end just to reflect on the entire symposium. It's been a great 4 weeks, and of course, a lot of things have come out. We've got a lot of positive response, but we'd also like just to have a reflection with you on the entire symposium. Like Alex said, please go into the Q&A buttons and the chat button so that we are able to communicate with each other. Without further ado, I'd like at this moment to introduce our first presenter, somebody who's really impressed me with the level of his understanding of local government, and somebody who I'd like to meet and have further discussions, and that is Mr. Ronald Martin Daka, who is the Director of Local Government Investment Support Program at Lloyd's. That level of experience in terms of local government. He's also the former president of Society of Local Authorities Chief Executives and chairman of Valuation Surveyors Registration Board. And Mr. Daka holds a Bachelor of Science and in Land Economics and a Master's in Business Administration. Today, Mr. Daka will present on the challenge in municipal financing in the face of the National Land Titling Program. Mr. Daka, based on your experience and your studying, would really like to hear what your presentation is about so that we can learn a lot from you. Please go ahead, you have 15 minutes to present, and at the end, there'll be time for you to answer questions. That is at the end of all the presentations. Mr. Daka, please.
Thank you very much, Mwenda. Good afternoon, Zambia. Good morning, Washington. May I once again appreciate the opportunity to share on matters I think that are very important for the development of Zambia. My subject is the challenge in municipal financing in the face of the National Land Titling Program. First and foremost, I think I want to make it very clear that the National Land Titling Program is a good thing for Zambia. I think I do recall, yes, just last night that the Minister of Lands was reported on ZNBC that she was launching, the program and clarifying that the program shall be on state land, which basically implies that it excludes traditional land. And I think I much appreciate, that aspect of the clarification. But may I also say that the importance of this topic has to do with especially looking at the challenge in municipal financing. The bulk of local authority revenues, locally generated revenues, and in some cases for the bigger cities, you find up to 80% of locally generated revenues actually comes from land-related charges, either local taxes or owners' rates, fees and charges, payments, and so on and so forth. So somehow you find revenues related to local authorities are tied to land. And I think it's a very important point for us to acknowledge. I can give an example that a big city like Kitwe, if you look at the budget for this year, 190 million, but of that 190 million kwacha, only 36 million will come from either national resources, meaning that it's either grants of some form, but the rest of the money, in other words, 80% of the money comes from locally generated revenues. Lusaka City Council, the picture is more or less the same. 70% somehow, because when you hear a license in a local authority, it means somehow they are connected to something to do with some plot or some piece of land somewhere. I can have the next slide. Now, like I have already alluded to, the National Land Titling Program is now ongoing, really, if we may put it that way. And it's got all these good things. It will provide security of tenure to property owners. It will also increase the government's revenue base. When I look at government here, let's also look at not only central government, but also local government. Now, this will be largely through ground rent and other land-related revenues. Then also it will increase investment in the country and help grow its GDP. As long as you have your title, it means you have security of tenure on your property. Then have the next slide. Now, there are a number of challenges. I think if you look at my study, we identified a number of challenges which municipalities and local authorities will face in view of how we are handling the implementation process. I have very stated it's about the implementation, which I feel there is need, for us to see how best can we relook at the implementation. Number one, if we don't handle this process properly, the way I feel we are doing now, you'll find that it is at variance to the spirit of the National Decentralization Policy. The National Decentralization Policy is anchored in the Constitution of Zambia, and I think I've cited Articles 147 all the way to Article 152. Secondly, it disregards both the Urban and Regional Planning Act number 3 of 2015. It's a key piece of legislation in as far as anything to do with development on land is concerned. It also disregards to a very large extent the Local Government Act. Thirdly, it is not in conformity with the approved intergovernmental fiscal architecture. The intergovernmental fiscal architecture was approved in 2017, in September 2017, when the Secretary to the Cabinet signed the policy document on financing of local government. But you'll find that what we are doing now under the National Land Titling Program is not conforming to the IFA, the Intergovernmental Fiscal Architecture. Number 4, it shall result in loss of land-related revenues by councils. Like I've already indicated, if 80% of the revenues of the bigger municipalities, the cities like Kitwe, cities like Lusaka, Ndola, and so forth, then we are creating yet another gap in terms of financing of local governments. Number 4, I'm saying that, look, there is studies showing there is no guaranteed funds for what development committees at the moment. What the development committees are now provided for in the Constitution of Zambia Now, you notice that our decentralization is saying that it's devolve, authority, responsibility to the lowest organs, but with matching resources. Now, matching resources means some of the resources that are being obtained must come from local sources. In other words, generate local resources that should finance certain development programs. So, at the moment, since the 2016 when there was an approval of the constitution to date, we don't have any specific way in which we want to finance what development committees. It's now the responsibility of each individual council to come up with how best they can be able to set aside some money for what development. Yet, as I'm going to point out, if we are financing what development, it's easier for a lot of things to be done at local level. Then also another major thing that I thought we will face is that traditional authorities shall have no access to any funds, even generated on land. Now, maybe with a clarification yesterday that the minister says, look, this program will be on state land. But remember, the bulk of this state land is still being excised off from traditional land. So still we'll be talking of the same problem, because the issue with traditional authorities is also how do they get financed, because they are also key partners in terms of development. So if land is being taken away and then it becomes state land, then they don't have a clear form of financing, then we have a problem. And I strongly think that we have to revisit this issue if municipal service delivery will be achieved in all these areas. You can have the next slide. Now I want also to state that municipalities and local authorities are now recognized as responsible for local economic development. You just need to look at the section 19 of the Urban and Regional Planning Act number 3 of 2015. Now, if you look at what this act provides for in terms of local economic development, one thing that comes out very clear is that modern management of local government requires that local authorities should have access to cadastral information for the management of development in their jurisdiction. Reason, again, is the issue. When I'm saying 80% of some councils' revenues come from connected somehow to land, we are now looking at the issues of, number one, how are we going to manage this information that you could easily access if you had your cadastral information right with you in the council? Issues of, collecting ground rent. In fact, progressively, a number of councils already, they are now putting ground rent as marginal income. Because why? What has been discovered is that it is increasingly becoming very, very difficult to have land on title. But of course, with the National Land Titling Program, gives us an opportunity that generation and collection of these property related fees and charges, even ground rent, property rates, and so on and so forth, is easy if we can get now local authority to have access to information. I would also want to state that it shall be difficult for municipalities and lower levels of governance to measure their baseline or progress made against set targets of economic growth. We need to be knowing, if today you ask an average Zambian, or perhaps maybe an average economist in Zambia, to say what is the GDP of Kitwe, I'm sure the answer, nobody will give you what the GDP for Kitwe is, what the GDP even for Lusaka is. Yet we have a GDP, which is our Zamstats has been able maybe to give for the whole country. But we really don't know what is happening in these municipalities. Yet, if we have information like this, it would be easy for us to start now measuring even the local GDP for a particular area. I'm also saying that, look, generation of critical data for calculating GDPs for local economies becomes an extremely difficult task without clear information. Then also, there shall be no proper coordination between local authorities and traditional authorities in development controls. Right now, you may find traditional authorities and local authorities are more or less operating in silos, each one doing their own thing and so forth. Can have the next slide. Now, when you get local authorities involved in national land titling, there are a number of advantages. Like I've indicated, revenue generation by local authorities is improved. Then two, land administration becomes easier to manage at every level of government, from the center right up to the ward level. Then efficiency in coordination of investment, ensuring that various levels of governance become active participants. You can have the next slide. Then also decision-making on land at every level of government becomes easy. And also it will help build the capacity of technical staff in local authorities in all the 116 districts in Zambia. Then data also for measuring real economic progress shall be easier to collect without creating another bureaucratic system of coordinating with the Ministry of Lands. The next slide. So I'm recommending that number one, the Ministry of Finance is obviously financing this, the Ministry of Lands is financing this exercise with both in-house and external consultants. So I'm saying number one, let us rearrange the terms of reference for the National Land Titling Program. It's not too late. Then two, each consultant, largely we are talking of survey firms which have been appointed, be requested to capacity build specific local authority staff in building district databases. This should be connected to the National Land Management Information Systems. Three, develop a strong district land registers in liaison with appointed district registrars. It's all provided for in the Urban and Regional Planning Act. And also work out a formula for revenue sharing between local authorities, traditional authorities, and government itself through the Ministry of Lands. Next slide. I think that ends my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Interesting presentation. It's a clear demonstration of how much experience you have. And please check the Q&A. There are a number of questions for you, so don't go away. After the last presentation, we would like you to respond to those questions. Our next presenter is Msonda Chipampata. Msonda is an urban planner with over 7 years of experience in practice in local government and academic research. He is the head of program and urban planning expert at Urban Innovations and is also an associate researcher at the Center for Urban Research and Planning. Msonda, you said today you'd like to add value to us. So you would like to present to us a presentation entitled Land Value Capture Innovations in Financing Natural Resource Management. Msonda, please go ahead with your very innovative presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mwenda. Am I being audible? Okay. So, yes, thank you. Interestingly, much of what I'm going to talk about rides on what Mr. Daga is from presenting, only that I'm taking one aspect of a certain concept that is slowly coming up as a means of financing local authorities or any kind of interventions that regards to many things. It could be infrastructure, infrastructure provision. In this case, we're focusing on natural resource management. And maybe I wish for interest of the participants, Mr. Daka is somebody that I've known personally. In the start of my career as a practicing urban planner, I worked under him up until we met in Kawi again. Again, we parted ways. So he's somebody that I've known from way back. So even much of the work that is done is very familiar to me. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm looking at land value capture. This is a concept that usually works around how government or public action gets to make certain interventions to sort of harness value out of public investments For example, where it supplies infrastructure, then out of what comes out of that is harnessed to finance other forms of service provision. So it's pretty much a mix of good governance and urban planning, and it's an integral tool that to advance positive physical and social environmental well-being. So at the face of it, it's dependent on how urban planning principles, or if you would put it another way, land use management is able to provide ways and means of capturing value out of the environment. Can I have the next slide, please? So in this study, we asked 3 questions. The first one was, what are the opportunities for the land value capture in the spatial framework, spatial planning framework that Zambia has currently? And also, we have a situation of a dual land tenure system, but then how can land management be synchronized to enhance opportunities for land value capture? And the other most interesting one is how are IDPs and municipal planning areas, where are the gaps that we have right now, and how is that affecting the opportunities that can ever be found in terms of land value capture? Next slide, please. So currently what we have as our spatial planning framework, or what guides our spatial planning in the country right now, is the Urban Regional Planning Act. Now, whatever that a municipality can do right now, the Act dictates that it has to be done within the IDP. Now, what this means is that, and according to what the Act says, is that planning authorities have restricted area of coverage to an IDP, which implies that they can only do whatever they have to do within its planning area. Now here, the part that says planning area, or the part of its area, the municipal area, it's the area where, so local authorities have what is called a planning boundary. So all that they do, or they have to be within that town planning boundary. So if there are any activities that have to go beyond the town planning boundary, in 25, the Act provides that local authorities may, in order to facilitate the implementation of an IDP or a local area plan, a LAP, into customer area, enter into a planning agreement with the chiefs responsible for that area. I'll further talk about where these provisions are actually causing gaps, and they are actually diminishing opportunities of capturing value, which is a very, it's a good opportunity for not just local authorities, but government as a whole to raise finances for different kinds of uses, and natural land resources is actually one of them. And then if you see how now things are operating between the planning area, which the local authority can work in, and the issues of the planning agreements, where you have to deal with the traditional authorities, it's leaving a gap. Now, 26 of the same Act provides that regional development and regional development plans, IDPs, local area plans, and stuff should be in sync, and they should be consistent. But if you look at it critically and you identify the gaps that are there, being able to achieve this consistency that this Act is actually talking about may become a bit of a problem. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so in this study, we had picked a few cases. We had the case of Nakonde, where Nakonde is a district that has been declared a district as far back as 1994. It was cut off from Isoka. And up to the present day, the district up to now does not have what is called a town planning boundary. So what it implies is that the aspect of planning the district with what the law provides, which is an IDP, is still it's actually not possible, because the town does not have a planning boundary up to the present. So we further went on to pick a few cases where we had engaged in the chief Waituka, the most dominant chiefdom within the district, and we had interactions with them and how they relate and understand the whole issue of land use management, and also the land administration and the variances that are there. I'll talk further what exactly was at this interface. So what you have is that to them, the sale of land in their chiefdom is or that somebody who has land in the chiefdom just has to get permission from the headman, and the headman has to just go and confirm that with the traditional chief. Now, and people are buying lands, and right now, Dakonde is one of the busiest, fast-growing border towns in the country. So when people buy land, the chiefdom says it is not their responsibility to make sure that whoever buys land, they see that they use it appropriately, right? So they say this is just up to the individual. And then they also further mention that there is no coordination between them and the local authority. Like the local authority does not really come in to advise the chiefdom. Of course, maybe in a few areas, but if you really look at it, strictly speaking, there's supposed to be more close collaboration, more interactions in this aspect. And so what it implies that if you look at Zambia right now, a bigger part is rural, and from statistics from Forestry Department, over 40 million of what we call natural resources right now sits in traditional authorities, and only about 7.1 is under statutory protection. So if you look at it, if you look at those statistics, and then you see, okay, so now if you have a situation where the chief areas are just being sold out at will, without either a zoning scheme or a proper coherent land use management system, it raises a lot of questions and a big sense of worry. The other part that we had done, we had looked at is some projects that were done by a consultancy firm called Meddim Zambia. I think some people could be very familiar with this. They've done quite a lot of works within Central and Lusaka provinces. From the time we had an interaction with them, they gave us, they are dealing about 12 chiefdoms in the country right now. But what they have currently active is 5. And in these places, they did share with us what they've been doing with the chiefs, a few areas where there are so-called planning agreements and how effective they've been, and if at all they're actually a tool that could actually be used. They also did mention the matters of poor coherence between the chiefs and the local authorities. So there are a lot of gaps that are coming up in this area, and it's really affecting not just land use management system, it's also affecting the administration part of land, and also it's also affecting opportunities that can never be seen when it comes to land value capture. Next slide, please. So the takeaway in this study have been, firstly, there is a gap in the land use management framework. So the IDPs can only apply within a planning area. What this now means is that, firstly, the IDP offers, the Act provides that you can enter into a planning agreement with the chiefs for an area that you may identify to be of value and you may need protection. It also provides that in an event that the chief may refuse to get into an agreement with you, they may, the Minister of Local Government to the President may order that an agreement be entered in the interest of the public, which binds both the traditional authorities together with the local authorities. Now, if you look at, in practical terms, if you look at the aspect of resource management, it's one that rides on the relationship and the ownership of the actual areas where you have these activities going on. Now, if you take through that route, which the Act provides, that the presidential consent comes in, yes, it does work, but there's a chance that they can now feel, okay, this was just imposed on us, and it becomes very difficult to protect those areas that are very, very important natural resources and to be protected. Then secondly, this leaves a gap between land use management and administration. What I mean here is that when you look at the current scenario of the type of the land tenure system that we have, planning development control, for example, is more concentrated on areas that are under state land, and where areas that are under customary, yes, there is an opportunity to do that, but to a very limited extent. So what it means is that within the state land area or the parts that are falling within the town planning boundary, you have a scenario of where planning has been coordinated with a proper zoning scheme, and that zoning scheme allows for people to gain more value, because where the parcels, the properties that they own are possibly located in such a way that they benefit from being closer to other properties. So there's that complementary effect. So they're able to grab enough value from that. Now, if you look at how currently, for example, the so-called planning agreements are being done, it firstly will limit the activities of the local authorities in there, in that they can agree on how to administer, how to control sort of development. But now it may not provide that opportunity of where you look at, okay, so how would zoning be done in here? Because a bigger part of it is based on what the chiefs would agree to. Now, what we are arguing for here is that if we have, for example, in the current state of our URP Act, right? I'll talk about this when it comes to recommendations, but and you look at, for example, let me pick an example of Chisamba. Those have driven along Great North Road when you're coming to Cabo or you're entering Osaka. You find a situation where you have land uses, activities, different industries sprouting just anywhere and everywhere. And now what causes that is that if those areas were to even fall within planning, what do you call it? Within areas where there's an agreement, you still have lapses of where you're not be able to control what is built where. And now, other things that have been proposed in the same act is that you have partnerships, development partnerships, which are now attached to the state lands, for example. There are different privileges that you may get if you own land under state land, and though there are those that you may not because you own it under customary land. So one gets to ask, if you have to really concentrate about land value capture, at what point then does land become valuable? Because if you say state land has more value than the customary land, then, but it's still land, it's still the same. So we have to find mechanisms where even customary land can be found to be of value, and the chiefs should equally have adequate authorities over them, that they do not find the situation where they enter in a planning agreement, everywhere that goes in a planning agreement, they start rezoning and changing into state land. Then they start losing, they don't have control in anymore in those areas. So maybe the recommendation, if I could quickly, I'm running out of time, I'll quickly run to that, is that the act, the URP Act needs to be localized where you have a zoning scheme or some kind of a bylaw that covers the entire district, so that you don't have gaps between the planning boundary and the district boundary, which is falling within the traditional authorities, and they have different variations on how they can govern their land. So if we are really going to look at benefiting from the land value capture principle, there are these things that need to be streamlined in as far as the acts that we're using, which is governing our land use management systems, into that frame that gives that opportunity for us to be able to capture as much land that is value and turn it into resources that we can actually use for the purposes of our natural resource management. Can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, that was my conclusion, my concluding slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Msonda. You've actually lived to my expectation. I liked your presentation. I liked the way you presented. You're almost like you're talking directly to me, opposite me. It felt very, very personal. Please hang on. Now we want to ask Mlenga to come on and make his presentation. And after Mlenga, then we'll open it up and have a discussion around your presentations. Mlenga is a graduate from the University of Lusaka with a bachelor's degree in real estate and is currently working with the government valuation department. He has a passion in coming up with concrete solutions to alleviating poverty through indiscriminate and secure land ownership. We welcome Mlenga. Please give us your presentation. You have 15 minutes to argue your case on the challenges of developing untitled land with an example of Chilenge South. Please, Mlenga, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning and evening to our colleagues around the world. My research is based on an investigation, of the challenges of developing untitled land, a case study of Chilenge South. So, what drove me to carry out this research was based on the news articles that I had heard and read of on the news, and also direct reports from people who I had interacted with, who were developers and also would-be developers. And this came out to light that most people carry out developments just based on the fact that they are able to, and they have found a piece of land, which usually or officially isn't the way that's supposed to be done. Based on that, people found that there was insecure ownership of land. And also based on an article that I read from the UN Habitat, it talks of how the development of land and it having sectarianship helps alleviate poverty, especially in women, women who most of the time to be widows. Those are heads of many households in our societies, and when they acquire a piece of land, they are mostly swindled out of their hard-earned savings. And so this just plunges them further into poverty. And so this discourages them from participating in developing property, either through farming, residential development, and also commercial development as well. So the prevalence of land irregularities therefore prompted this research. And I like the point that Mr. Chipampata mentioned of land value. Of course, he mentioned in regard to with regards to traditional land, customary land, it having a lower value than state land because it does not have secure tenure, because there's no title. So that is the case when a person develops land and they do not go through the right channel. Next slide, please. So in carrying out the study, it was hinged on the following objectives. The first one being to investigate the reasons for developing untitled land in Chilenge South. To identify, second one is to identify the challenges faced during the process of obtaining land title. And the third one, to ascertain the consequences of developing untitled land. Next slide, please. So, with regards to the first objective, investigating reasons for developing untitled land in Chilenge, the findings that I came across were the first one being lack of information. So, lack of information coming from the fact that people who were developing were mostly unaware of the procedures and the processes that one is supposed to undertake in carrying out property development. So most people just acquire a piece of land in even dubious ways and they go ahead and develop those properties without following the proper channels. The second one being desperation. Desperation based on people's need to develop their properties as quickly as possible. I came across certain respondents who even had to go ahead with developing their properties without having proper documentation from the local authorities. And they only had to go through the proper procedure 5 years after they had even completed their development. So desperation also in that some people purchase land and they later on find that there are other, maybe 2 or 3 other people who are claiming ownership of that land. So they quickly begin building the construction, they start building, and without waiting for the proper documentation to be processed. And the third finding was taking advantage of an inefficient enforcement system. The respondents that I spoke to gave accounts of how they have noticed the local authorities are not or do not carry out inspections regarding construction, whether someone has followed the construction regulations, be it the boundary, whether the person has followed the boundary regulations properly, or even just whether the property they're constructing is supposed to be in the place where they are. For example, others will construct a bar or a church in an area that is zoned for residential purposes. This is without proper application through the local authorities. And the fourth finding under this objective was most found that the procedure was really costly. So they chose to cut corners. But of course, this is something that is unavoidable. And so I think ways can be found regarding how they can properly have all the processes paid for, and so they can develop their properties legally and have secure ownership. Next slide, please. The second one is to identify the challenges faced during the process of obtaining land title. So this objective sought to find out from clients who had attempted or even also in the process of obtaining land from local authorities. So the findings included bureaucracy. So under bureaucracy, the procedure for acquiring title was said to be bureaucratic, and it was not as efficient as they had expected, or as they were told it would be. Sometimes red tape was found to be prevalent, and the system that is laid out requires one to go through a number of procedures which lack synchronicity. The second finding was favoritism. So most of the complaints that I found from people were that mostly favoritism was order of the day, because for one to be properly serviced at the local authorities, they would have to at least know someone, or at least know someone who knows someone. So this proved to be frustrating, and it discourages a number of people from participating in the legal acquiring of land and title. And the third one being records management. In this era, it surprises most people that records are still kept physically, and even with the advent of cloud computing, one would think that records would also be kept in such a manner that they are easily accessed and just easily stored. So records management, physical records management proved that documents would get lost. And that meant a client would have to maybe go back 3 or 4 steps back, thus lengthening the time in which a certain service is accorded to them. And this also would be costly for mostly people who are coming from out of town, and even those within town who probably have deadlines to complete. And the fourth one, corrupt practices. So this is in a cases where respondents have safe accounts of being written office, and others would only be responsible or would provide a service that clients are entitled to only after a certain favor was accorded to a certain officer. Next slide, please. And the third objective was setting the consequences of developing untitled land. So the findings under objectives included demolition of structures, and under demolition of structures, it is known that before a structure is demolished, an enforcement is served on the legal developer as required under Section 31 of the Town and Country Planning Act, Cap 283 of the laws of Zambia. So the enforcement notice gives 28 days in which the remedy to breach can be carried out, failure to which the structure may be demolished. So the City Council has been empowered to recover the cost of demolishing the structure for the illegal developer. This includes hiring the equipment and also paying officers who have been tasked to carry out the demolition itself. So the Lusaka City Council uses demolition as a way of development control in the city, like in cases of squatters and land dividers. These are some of the names given to people who develop illegally. And the second finding was developers may be fined based on the extent of the error they've committed, and also imprisonment of developers. And sometimes all three consequences would be allocated to an illegal developer. Next slide, please. So from the findings that I came across, some of the recommendations that I could come up with were, one, to publicly sensitize people on the development of land. People need to have information, or else they would not know how certain procedures are supposed to be followed. Even though things go that ignorance is not an excuse, some people just do not know. So sensitization should be key. And then decentralization of land administration process to district level. So land administration should be spread to districts as well, because as it stands now, the only places where such services are offered are in Lusaka and in Kitwe, if I'm not mistaken. So people need to have such services within their localities so they can easily carry out such processes, and reinforce workforce and monitor work ethics. Another recommendation would be improve record management and storage, at least introduce the e-way of electronic way of managing records. Then have specific departments to reduce movement of people and records, and empower responsible institutions in reinforcing Europe Act of 2015 to effectively monitor and control administration of land development. Further study recommendations So this study was only carried out on a small locality, which is Challenge South, because of the time frame that I had. But further recommendations would be to carry it out on a wider scale to get more views from other respondents, and also importance of land administration for citizens, and also propose steps to implement and, if necessary, formulate policies aimed at comprehensive land management. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mlenga. Thank you. Having lived in Challenge South, yeah, just gives memories of when you start mentioning things and you start putting everything into context. Thank you very much, Mlenga, for that interesting presentation. Now I would like to go into the questions. A number of questions on the Q&A, and would like to, if we could just go to the Q&A and start looking at the questions. And the first question comes from Patrick from Zambia Land Alliance, and it goes to Mr. Daka. Patrick says, Mr. Daka, while I agree with you that land titling is good for the country, but safety nets have been put in place. What safety nets have been put in place to protect land rights of the poor and vulnerable Zambians who cannot afford to pay the statutory fees and rates? Mr. Daka, could you respond to Mr. Msole?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. What safety nets have been put in place? It's a little bit difficult for me to state as to what safety nets have actually been put in place. But I think my basic understanding is that as the Ministry of Lands is implementing this program, there's a lot of consultation with the local areas before any issuance of title. So I would expect that again, following the Urban and Regional Planning Act, which talks about you do your local area planning, because I mean we will not just be, I believe we will not just be issuing titles in the vacuum, as it were. It must be within a context of a reasonably planned system. In other words, the land parcels will be identified in a way that involves other stakeholders, so that through that, then necessary safety nets can be put in place. But it's a little bit difficult for me to answer that straight, because I think I would have to maybe check further what is it that is going to be done, particularly in the high density areas. In any case, my paper is actually arguing also that, look, if we don't do these things in close consultation with the local authorities, then you are creating another problem, because local authorities, they have ward development committees in each of the wards. Like if you take, for example, Lusaka, in each of the wards of Lusaka, we are supposed to have ward development committees, which if they work closely with the Ministry of Lands, particularly the team that is doing the national land titling, and it becomes easier that in terms of identifying that whatever is being done does not disadvantage anyone.
Thank you very much for that response. I hope, Patrick, you are satisfied a bit, but I'm sure that you still need another question to be answered. And this goes to Msonda. And still from Patrick from Zambia Land Alliance. Msonda, or anybody, do you know how many of the 116 districts have started implementing IDPs, where local authorities are now planning customary land use? So I can take it up, but also Mr. Daka can also take it up, especially that you've got so much experience in local government. Could you start with them, Sonda?
Yes, thank you. I think if anybody attended yesterday's presentations, one that came from Mr. Piri, he had given an indication of one local authority, which is I forgot the name, Rufunza. They're actually implementing an IDP, and it has gone beyond the planning boundary, because they had applied for an extension which was granted, and they went further to ask for more land, specifically for possibly could have been some specific thematic areas that needed that could not, the effects could possibly not end at town planning boundaries. As you know, special phenomena cannot be restricted to the boundary, may go beyond the districts, even beyond the country. So possibly it could have been one of those situations. They had to come with a special memorandum of understanding and how they were going to cover that area under the IDP. I actually did ask what sort of agreement that was used to have that land beyond the town planning boundary become part of the IDP. And the response was that it wasn't necessarily a planning agreement, but just an agreement to give that land or that area to become part of the IDP. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. This question goes again to you, Msonda, so please just stay on. And this is from Francis. And he's asking, what mainly is the gap in the URP Act which would require localized bylaws? Are local area plans and sector plans localized enough to address some of the issues raised? Sandra, could you respond to Francis?
Yes, thank you. So if you look at what a local area plan or a sector plan covers, it covers what is within an envelope of the broader IDP. So now what you do or what happens between where the IDP ends and where the land goes up the district boundary. So what we have right now is that IDPs, as the Act indicates, it's restricted to a planning area. The planning area by definition and according to the Act is the area that is falling within the town planning boundary or the area that has been given to the local authorities, of course, from the traditional authorities where they can have full control and full operating power. Now, if you look at the land between the town planning boundary and the district boundary, that is the area where you have the customary land. Now, that is the area where we have a lot of, where I'm actually pointing out to be areas of attention. I'll give an example of a South African planning system. How it's been structured is such that you have your national planning, spatial planning law, that is supposed to be localized by provincial land use planning. Now, that provincial land use planning, they both at these two levels, they are all just providing what I can call sort of guidance. They are in a way just framework legislation. So they provide a framework in which you get to act or to do or to practice what you're doing. Then, further than that, the Provincial Land Use Planning Act is further now operationalized to the ground by a municipal planning bylaw. So what now that does is that you already have a coverage of a planning system that goes up the district boundary. So the gaps where you have a point where the IDP ends or where the planning authority can fully exercise their rights is going up the town plan boundary. In such a scenario, you have everything covered. So you won't have situations where somebody will go to the chief, gets maybe 30, 40 hectares, and that one is not attached to any zoning regulation or any zoning scheme that is within that area. And then they put up a factory or something that is now not complementary to the other land uses that are occurring, naturally occurring land uses within the area. So what you find is a situation where if I also get up and go and get land from the same chief and they give me in an area, it become another island where I can do everything and anything that I want. So now, because the act is at that level, we may need something that can now ground it down. And why I'm arguing like this is because what could happen in one local authority may not be the same as what could happen in another. What could happen in one district may not be the same as what could happen in another district. Like example, I can actually pick on right now is what's happening in Rufunsa and possibly what's happening in Nakonde. So here in Nakonde, for example, to plan for something beyond the town plan boundary, we may have to engage the chief and get into a well-signed planning agreement. For the case of Rufunsa, they didn't even use a planning agreement, but they just agreed and they sat and the land was given to the council. So it's because of these different context-specific scenarios that will require a way or a mechanism to further narrow down or to further ground the URP Act in a very context sensitive manner. The local area plans they ground it down within the IDP area. The sector plans ground down within a specified and confined area. So they may not overlap and go beyond what is not within the planning boundary. So these are some of the areas that where if we were to sit and make a sort of a municipal planning bylaw, that now has to be made between the local authorities and the traditional authorities, and they agree to it, then it becomes better, because then you don't have to make them feel that once they give you land, you convert to this land, they no longer have they no longer have authority over you. But you are able to
thank you very much, Sonda. Thank you. And I can see a number of people waving and saying we also want to have a number of questions answered. There's a question from Moses, and Moses seems to be a little bit confused after all the presentations. It says, is developing peri-urban land or raw land illegal? What then is the right documentation for one to have before they can develop their land in these areas? This goes to all the presenters, but could we just in a short, because we've got a number of questions to still go through, just in 1 or 2 minutes, give a response to Moses, at least to satisfy him. We could start with you, Ronald. Just one minute, 30 seconds.
It's fine, thank you. Just to indicate that developing peri-urban land, yes, you can do it legally, but what you need to do is that you apply for, to the planning authority for that particular area to guide you in terms of how you go about the procedure. Number one, if you don't have a title for the land, the question is you are developing what? Because there is need to know that first you must be able to secure title for the land, and then after that you begin now to process your planning permission, which must be given under the Urban and Regional Planning Act. Now, I think most of what Musonda was referring to, it comes out of Section 25 of the Urban and Regional Planning Act. It explains, I think, a number of things in terms of planning agreements and all those things. But if it's an individual parcel, make sure that number one, you have title. Two, you have, your planning permission and procedures. I think the guidelines are there in the Urban and Regional Planning Act.
Thank you very much, Ronald. Francis, I will skip your question, which are directed to Ronald and Sonda for the meantime. I'll take it to the end because I'd like to close up this discussion. I would like to go to Jacinta's question, and this to Mr. Daka again. How does the NLTP harmonize the dual land tenure system? Is the NLTP another way of killing customary land tenure? Are we putting out the single tenure? Are we moving towards the single tenure system in Zambia? Mr. Daka, please give a response to Jacinta.
Or perhaps just refer to the statement by the minister yesterday to say that national land titling will be done on state land. So for now, I think we restrict ourselves to what the person responsible for the ministry, our Honorable Minister of Lands, what she was able to say, and that is the direction for now. But I think what we are saying, I think for goodness sake, we are saying, look, why don't you look at widening this, but then begin to look at, because customary land in any case, slowly it is diminishing. I think in the earlier presentations we had, in some cases, others were citing 60% of land now remains as customary. Yet I think a few years back we were talking of 90% plus as customary land. But if we are now talking about 60%, the question is, really we need to have the exact data, what exactly is happening with customary land. So customary land is actually, it's a matter of time that eventually most of this land will turn into state land.
Mr. Daka, it's not my fault that you are a very experienced local government specialist. So the next question still goes back to you. And this is from Grace from Civic Forum. And she's asking, Mr. Daka, the chiefs were consulted during the development of the URP. And I believe that the URP sought to address planning gaps. However, if the ARP can only be applied in a planning area, this means traditional areas cannot be planned, and we shall continue to witness uncoordinated development. I feel we have sufficient policies as a country. What is it that traditional leaders desire, as cited in the presentation? The developments in Chibombo leave very little to be desired. Mr. Daka, like I said, well, it's a price of paying to be very experienced.
Wenda, thank you very much. Just a little bit worried. I said, well, the price of being experienced. May I say that the issue of, again, Section 25 of the Urban and Regional Planning Act, that if a local authority would like to develop an area, a customary area, the question is, what should it do? And I think this is referring to, or rather, this is where, like Musonda's presentation talked about the issue of entering into planning agreements. Now, when you're entering into a planning agreement, it means you will identify a parcel of customary land that you think should be part of the integrated development plan. Now, you can only do that after you've officially agreed with the local, with the traditional authority responsible for that area. In other words, once you've entered into a planning agreement, then you can begin to plan that land as though it is part and parcel of a planning area. And of course, once you've declared that planning area, the chiefs have given consent, of course, you proceed and be able to plant that land, and whoever develops will develop like any other state land. But remember, the key is agreeing with the chief responsible for that particular area. If the chief does not give consent, then at the end of the day, unless government wants, because again, the Urban and Regional Planning Act does provide where government can exercise some degree of eminent domain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daka, for that. This question goes to all of you. Blenda, you can also chip in. We haven't heard from you for a bit of time. And it's from Rose Fumpa. And her question starts like this: whether we like it or not, land titling reduces the land under those respective chiefdoms. For example, when chiefs give land to municipalities, that land automatically changes jurisdiction powers. As chiefs give people permission to have title in their chiefdoms, those pockets of land become state land, hence reducing customary land. That's the death of chiefdoms. I'm referring to your suggestion to consider revenue sharing between state and chiefs might offer a lasting solution to this development change, which is right at our doorsteps. I would like to proceed more in this question. I know it's being referred to Mr. Daka. You know, you've given 80%, 10%, 10% revenue sharing. How did you come to that calculation, Mr. Daka?
Thank you. The issue is that when you are giving out, or rather when you are administering land, what will be the job of the Ministry of Lands when they get that particular money or the ground rent, for example? Really, at the end of the day, you'll find that when it comes to service delivery, it's the responsibility of the local authority to administer that land. Now, in terms of the 80% that this money can be appropriated or should go to local authorities, the idea is that for local authorities, it should be a situation where in turn they work closely with the chiefdoms through the ward development committees, with the chiefdoms, through other measures that are provided for in the law, for the chiefdoms to be able to have access to some of the ground rents. And in fact, even the danger for the death of chiefdoms may not even arise at that particular point, because the main issue is about collecting revenue. If chiefs are not guaranteed any revenue, this is why they will sell the land to an investor, thinking that you get a one-off. But remember, I think it was only yesterday, it was reported in the news that in fact one chief area within Central Province, I think there is a there's a problem where, you know, they've basically deposed the chief. You know, the royal family has decided to depose their own chief because they feel he's only collecting money alone rather than the rest of the family. Now, I want to say that these are the things that we need to, you know, properly address. In other words, let's begin to look at a more structured system for chiefs to be able to allocate land. More standardized, a more structured system that should be able now to help the local people within those areas to begin to get revenues on a regular basis. So for the revenues, the 80% that goes to local authorities, we should also be factoring in there a portion that should be able to go to the chiefs. In other words, we would be saying, look, the chiefs should be able to get maybe another 10 or 20%, which will go into the ward development committee, because the chiefs basically are the people responsible for the wards. We are really talking of the actual people benefiting from the money that that is supposed to be coming out of their area. But if we are going to say the revenues go to Control 99, I always give an example that Land Development Fund has not been very successful, because why? The ground rent is collected in a particular area, and to access that money, there are a lot of factors that go in. So it becomes again another bureaucratic, you know, system. So why not from the word go to say when revenues are collected, let so much percent go to the local authority. Like in this case, we are suggesting 80%, which can now be shared with the chiefdoms. By the way, I emphasize local authority because the local authorities are closer to the chiefs. And in terms of even when you have done all your information, you know, in terms of land, you know which area. Like the chief dictator, as an example, let me put it that the chiefs in the Chivombo area, because of so much land that has been given out, now it is becoming state land. Why shouldn't they be benefiting something from that land through ground rent on a sustainable basis?
Thank you very much, Ronald. And I'd like to get back to Mlenga. You've been a bit quiet and just relaxing. Thanks for the smile. Among the reasons you gave for people going on to untitled land, is that that of lack of information, desperation, taking advantage of insufficient enforcement system, avoiding cost incurred during the legal property development process. Which ones did you find as the most prominent reasons for people going on to untitled land? Lenga.
Thank you. The most prevalent response I found was lack of information. Others only have bits and pieces of information, which they only depend on from others who also have the same bits or pieces of information. And mostly it's not sufficient for them to even carry out any development, because most of them do not depend entirely on what they hear from others. So that's why one of my suggestions was having programs, for example, sensitization programs, maybe community talks, drives around certain locations, and even television and radio programs. I have heard of some being conducted, and it is a move in the right direction. And I feel that if more of such is carried out, people will be informed, because an informed population would ensure that developments are carried out in the right way, and sanity would be something that we'll be able to see in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mlenga. I'd like to get to Msonda. Msonda, in your presentation, you make note that under the project by Medim Zambia, only one of the chiefdoms under the project had a functional planning agreement. Is it possible to elaborate on that? Planning agreement between who? And was it in conformity with the URP Act? Msonda?
Yes, thank you. So the one chiefdom that they had informed us where there's an active running plan agreement is the one under Chief Wunda Wunda. And I think even yesterday's presentation, Mr. Perry made reference to Chief Gunda Gunda. I don't know if that's how it's actually pronounced, but the indication was that within the chiefs that they've been working with near the Chongwe area, I think it's between Chongwe and Rufunsa, somewhere around there, that is the one chief that they know of. They have which has an active. I don't know to what extent how functional that is, but they indicated that they have an active planning agreement between the local authority in the area and the chief.
Okay, thank you very much, Msonda. Jacinta has written a comment, which she says, why even the National Land Titling Program, no matter the different statements being given, as long as it is a national program, it looks like it's an underhand method of converting all customary land to state and thereby diminishing powers of the chiefs and killing chiefdoms. Let me ask Ronald, what was the level of consultation for this program? Who were consulted? Because when people start providing comments like that, it means that maybe they were not consulted. What was the level of consultation from your perspective?
Mwenda, and I think members, people participating in the symposium, I'll be very honest with you that I strongly think that there wasn't adequate amount of consultation in terms of how this program would have been implemented. It's a beautiful program. I mean, the whole idea of a national titling program is well intended, and I think the benefits are immense. But I'll mention that in terms of consultation, would have if there was very adequate consultation, it would have helped in terms of streamlining the implementation itself. Because sadly, in terms of implementation now, we have all these gaps, and these gaps are real. We can't run away from that. But again, it would be best, I think, for the Ministry of Lands themselves to be able to give a very realistic answer. But I would say that looking at what happened and how things have been run, remember that this thing started a few years ago. If I'm not mistaken, as early as 2017, somewhere there was a statement of this program coming up. And in fact, by 2019 December, we should have had a minimum of 500,000 titles issued. But again, because of some of the gaps up to last year, or rather up to now, we still are talking of like still taking off. Now that tells you that we have a problem. And this problem, in my view, all what is needed is further consultation to make sure that everybody is on board. But beyond that, it will help in terms of streamlining how the implementation process will be done.
Thank you very much, Ronald. This question goes to any of you, and is from Francis. Before we go to the last one, then Matt could come in and help us as we wind up our symposium. Francis goes to say, does it mean conversion of tenure from traditional to state land is the only guaranteed avenue locals can derive benefit from the land? Isn't it possible to develop localized terms of reference within the planning agreements that benefit both parties without changing the tenure system? I thought it was the last one, but I can see another comment from Mr. Mlenga. But could the presenters just answer this question to Francis? Does it mean that conversion is the only way?
Okay, Mwenda, I could start if that's okay.
That's fine, Sonda. Any of you could start it. Yes, that's fine. Thanks.
All right, so I'll just make it quick. So what it is that depending on the kind of land tenure system, this is what I found out. Depending on the kind of land tenure system that your land is on, has a certain set of privileges that you can actually enjoy. And from experience, the state land or the leasehold tenure system has more benefits compared to the customary one or the traditional land tenure system. And this is why you see an increased number of people converting to state land. which I feel shouldn't be the case, because what land can produce is still the same. I think we may just need to change the system where, for example, if I make a reference to ZDA Act to issue an investment license, for example, on what it calls formal land, owned land, like, for example, where you have a title deed, for example. So, and banks, for example, if they have to issue with the financing facility, they may ask, they hold their feet if what you have is just documentation from the chiefs. So I think different types of land tenure system give you different privileges. Maybe that is what we need to look at and see where we can change, so that each one of them should have an equal access to different privileges and opportunities that one can ever get. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to read the following comments, interesting comments, and Rolf Shenton, thank you very much for tuning in. It's nice that you're one of us. Thomas Zulu says, I agree with Mr. Mlenga on records management. In this computer age, we are still experiencing hiccups in obtaining titles due to loss of records from time to time. And this reminds me of the clip which was on social media of what was happening in Kawe. I think a lot of you interested in land matters had a look at it, and you were mesmerized that people were producing papers, but their buildings were actually destroyed. Rolf says rising population and consumption means we will need more food, fiber, and energy from the land. Will little parcels of individual ownership make the country more productive or managed as a whole under traditional tenure? This is basically a question, and I think Ronald, maybe you could answer it in a minute, because I would like to give Matt at least 20 minutes to wind up the symposium. Ronald, could you answer this question for Rob, please?
Thank you, Wenda, and very good question. Rising population and consumption. We will need to parcels of individual ownership make the country more productive or managed as a whole under traditional tenure. It's about security. If you have security of tenure, like Musonda has indicated, you have access, I think, to there are a number of privileges that come with security of tenure. You can get a loan, meaning that you can finance, an investment. Now, where land is not titled, like as at now, we have a big problem in some of the areas. Go to some areas. I can cite like in Northwestern Province, where you'll find that because of this lack of having documents of title, there's a way in which people may not be able to benefit the most from their land. If there's a mining firm coming in and you have your land on title, you have a much better chance of getting better compensation than if you don't have a title. So whether there will be small titles, and I believe that this is all over the world, that wherever you go, as long as you own land, you must have title to that land. If you have a title, you are assured, you are guaranteed that you can be sure that that land is yours. But if you don't have title, you can be manipulated in any way. So yes, I think it can help in terms of improved productivity. Of course, a lot of other factors will come into play to improve productivity, but the starting point is that a title is a guarantee for more privileges.
Thank you. Thank you, Ronald. And Patrick says, I agree with Mr. Daka. There wasn't adequate, I think, consultations. There were 3 SASOs that work on lands, presenting the systematic national testing launch yesterday. None of us were consulted who were listed as stakeholders. Thank you very much, Patrick, for that. We still have 1 or 2 questions, and let me go back to Francis' question before we get to the last question. The question to Francis, which he was asking, had to do with both Mr. Daka and Mr. Musonda. I need to. get the question where he was saying, what steps do you think we should take to improve on the use of the land? Let me just get to the question itself. Okay. There's a question which states that, can you provide further information about the current state of discussions between the Ministry of Lands and local government regarding allocation responsibilities and revenue sharing? Mr. Daka, is it possible?
My quick comment is that it's difficult for me to know.
No.
Sorry, can I go ahead?
Oh, okay, no. Yeah. The question is, do you have any ideas on further information about the current state of discussions between the Ministry of Lands and local government regarding allocation of responsibilities and revenue sharing? This is more in terms of, there was a mention about contradictions in legislation and the like, but do you have any ideas on if there are any discussions around responsibilities around land allocation and revenue sharing?
Very important question. Unfortunately, I'm out of the system, so I am not able to answer that. I don't know how far they have gone. And neither did I pose it as a question when I was carrying out, my research. Because I think the impression I was given was that there hasn't been much ever since I think we stopped those discussions early last year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daka, Msonda, Mlenga. You've been harassed, but you've given us a lot of food for thought and a lot of learning, but also unlearning. I'm sure, Mr. Daka, you realize that when you stay in these areas for some time, you learn a lot, but sometimes you have to unlearn some of the things you've learned. At this moment in time, I'd like to get to Matt to provide us some insights in terms of where we are going. You could also send some questions to Matt. We still have 30 minutes, so give some questions in case you would like to find out what's going to happen after this or something like that. Matt, please.
Great. Thank you, Mwenda. And yeah, I don't think I have 30 minutes of closing discussion. So if you do indeed have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or the Q&A, and we will try to address. Again, I'm wearing a mask just to reiterate the importance of taking care of yourself and taking care of those around you. So really, in closing for this year's very strange symposium, I just wanted to give a few words. First of all, thank you to USAID for hosting this event for the 5th year in the past 6. Thank you to our speakers. I think we had 32 speakers and 4 moderators for your participation in this. Thank you to the participants. We're still calculating the numbers at our height. We had over 100 online at a given time. We've always had 30 to 70 in any given meeting. And many of you have stayed the whole time, and some of you have just popped in, so we thank you for both of those. We decided not to do an official sort of government closing and all of this because it would be a little bit awkward, but I think one of the key outcomes here is we'd like to continue this type of discussion, so not to fully consider this a closure of the project or of the symposium. So, but thank you very much to our government and traditional leaders who joined us at various parts of this meeting, and we're open to confronting and discussing the areas of tension that we've revealed and come across. So, you know, I know that some of you on the line have been at all of the previous meetings, and we've seen big evolutions in some of these items. The National Land Titling Program was just a thought in the Surveyor General's mind back 5 or 6 years ago, and now we see action. Other questions continue to be asked each year, and we still don't have answers. For example, how much land is under customary tenure in the country that could be resolved through a more complete land audit. But at the same time, in the last few weeks, some of the stories from Nakonde, Chansali, Mumbwa, Mangu, Chilenji have continued to show us that the experiences that are happening across Zambia are actually pretty similar. Whether it's experienced by local planners trying to work in areas of limited resources at the border of customary and state land, academics who are still grappling with bringing together the case studies, and implementers who are stumbling, achieving results, and learning at the same time. And the stories have tended to be fairly consistent. And each is really deepening the argument about why the Integrated Land and Resource Governance Program is here, and why we continue to work with so many different partners, and why I think each of our partners also realizes that you can't address these issues in one ministry or with one stakeholder or with one donor, one chief, one community. It has to be a system. What we see and we continue to experience is both gaps and overlaps on the land, gaps in authorities between ministries and overlaps between communities, gaps and overlaps in authorities between communities, their leaders, and government, gaps and overlaps between customary and state institutions, certain amount of discretion by those with power to make decisions about approvals or not approving something, which tends to lead to more uncertainty, whether for the individual smallholder farmer, for an investor, for chiefs themselves, or for individual planners within local government. And really, each of these gaps and overlaps of responsibility and authority typically take place on land in relation to people's livelihoods, both at a household level and broader government perspective. It affects culture. So much of what we've been talking about is the culture, it's the tradition, it's how things have worked, and in many places continue to work, how those structures have adapted, and what we can do to bring things that work to the surface. So with that importance of culture, we also look at the sustainability of the ecosystem and the ability of the land in Zambia to provide for the services that that folks hope for, whether it's in an urban environment or whether it's in a more agricultural environment. So just to let you know, within the USAID ILRG program, we are trying to address some of these issues in partnership, particularly through supporting consultation around the national land policy. As the director of planning at the ministry noted a few weeks ago, they are near the final steps. It's being looked at, should be going to cabinet very soon. And then also working on what does that mean thereafter? How do we implement? How do we collaborate with the Ministry of Lands on practices to deepen gender integration in the results? And how do we meet our 50% land allocation to women objectives when land is often allocated at the first step by local authorities and not actually the Ministry of Lands, or at least advertised. We also believe working with the House of Chiefs on gender and chiefdom governance to support dialogue among chiefs on leadership and governance. We've heard from Chief Kaputa in the first day. We've heard stories from many other chiefs with different experiences and different lessons and opportunities to offer. ILRG continues supporting customary land documentation and administration with some of these chiefs, and of course with local area planning and collaboration between chiefs, communities, and local authorities. So the final two thoughts, and then I'll take a look at the questions in any chat to close things up, was that Mulenga, just now stressed the idea of information, really at the national level down to the local level. We need to help simplify, communicate the positive results, to be increasingly transparent and not afraid to raise the challenges that we're facing and have the courage to bring people together to try to resolve the challenges. there is sort of a wonderful group of people, dedicated people within government, within CSOs, within communities, and chiefs who are interested in addressing these topics. So really encourage that to continue to move. And I guess, there is not a destination in land governance. It's a journey. In the US, where I come from, we're celebrating 244 years of independence, and we still struggle with many of these same issues. Many of the issues of common land and who has access and how, many of the issues around planning and what is allowed in various areas. And it's clear that there's not one strategy or a roadmap that's going to get us there, but it's a toolbox of solutions that we need to share with one another. And I think what came up over the course of the last 4 weeks are a number of tools to put in that toolbox. So really hopeful that we can continue to push that forward. I don't see any additional questions or chats. I may be just ignoring them, but I think what you'll see in the next couple of days, and what we're sort of thinking, due to this meeting has been more successful than I think we'd anticipated. We're thinking about continuing these discussions and offering up opportunities for people who would like to moderate a discussion, a platform to focus deeper in some of the sub-themes and to really pull together a strong narrative so that we can dive into some of the challenging issues that our presenters have done a great job of raising, but which we really do need to continue discussing. So with that, I guess I would like to thank everyone. Mwenda, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank Alex and Chilombo, who have been working in front of this picture and behind the picture to make sure that things work. And really, we've only had 1 or 2 technology hiccups, and really, yeah, very grateful. So with that, I suppose I will, on behalf of USAID and the ILRG program, thank you all for coming, and wish you good luck in continuing to grapple with these challenges. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. And see you in the next symposium. Thank you. Thank you to everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.